Hi, welcome to the Multifamily Growthcast. This Aloha Friday drip is brought to you by the Multifamily Mindset.
Yes.
And for those of you who do not know, maybe it's your first time tuning in, you've been listening to Dallas's drips, and you're like, who in the world is this raspy-ass voice on here? Every Friday we do an Aloha Friday drip where me, Tyler Devereaux, and Jackson Campbell will talk about something in relation to whatever Jackson wants to talk about. Multifamily mindset,
and it's really dependent on
family.
what they want to hear, right?
Yes.
We take suggestions, right? No, we definitely want to give y'all what you need for sure. This is a free resource for us to be able to put together some high quality content for y'all. So we would love the ideas of what's going to help and benefit you guys.
So my question though is, how do you know what they need?
I invite them, we invite them, and I invite you again now to email us at growthcast@themultifamilymindset.com with those suggestions of things that you might want to hear Tyler talk about. Definitely send those into the email, and we'll definitely get them slated to get recorded.
Yeah, really, Jackson wants to know that, not necessarily because he wants to know what you want to learn about, but more because he doesn't want to come up with the topics every week. So, I mean, it's okay. It serves both needs, bro.
It can be win-win. Last episode, we talked about win-win situations, and this is just another one of those win-win situations.
I love it. So what are we talking about today?
So last episode, you talked about, you mentioned apartment syndications. We talked about what you look for when you're looking for a passive investment, on how to, on what investments you're looking at. And you mentioned real estate syndications, and we got tons of feedback there. What even is real estate syndication? So that's what I want to talk about today. What's real estate syndication and how does it work?
Dude,
apartment syndication rather, not real estate syndication.
But dude, tomato, because I mean, you can syndicate, and I'll get into these details, but I'll say this. I laugh because I can relate to that so much. Like, dude, I would have considered myself, I think pretty much anybody would have considered myself a fairly savvy investor the first time I learned about real estate syndication, apartment syndications. Dude, I had done a number of single family flips. I had some rentals. Dude, I had even wholesaled a few small apartment buildings, but I had no idea what apartment syndication meant, right? And in fact, that's why I decided to wholesale those small apartment buildings, because I had no idea really how to fund an acquisition of something that size, because I couldn't do that on my own, right?
Right.
So looking back, that ignorance that caused me to accept some short-term dollars instead of acquiring this long-term wealth. And when I realized that and I saw that and I understood it, was like, dude, I went gangbusters, full force in, right? So honestly, I thought that the only people, and I'll answer your question, but I thought the only people that could own big apartment buildings were just the extremely wealthy people that, I had no idea, and that got passed down from generations, And you're not the only one that thinks that. I've talked to multiple, whenever I'm talking about real estate investing to people, that's always one of the very first things that people bring up is I thought it's just for the rich white dudes who have been passing down their apartments from generation to generation. I think they think that that's just for them. Totally. So no, you're definitely not the only one to think that. Yeah, no, it's so true.
Okay, so apartment syndication.
Yep.
On a very basic terms, what is apartment syndication?
The most basic definition that I could think of is a group of individuals or companies, and this is syndication as a whole. So we talk about apartment syndication, real estate syndication. Syndication is defined as really a group of individuals or companies that combine their resources, right? So time, expertise, money, et cetera, to do something that they couldn't do or that would be very, very hard to do on their own. So, if you're thinking about an apartment building, dude, a lot of people would freaking love to own an apartment building, an appreciating asset like an apartment building, provides great cash flow, great tax benefits, but very, very few people have the ability, right? The time, resources, expertise, money, et cetera, to purchase a big apartment complex on their own. So syndication.
So syndication essentially is a fancy business word for a business team.
Yeah, partnerships.
Partnerships and putting together teamwork. No, that's awesome.
I remember when I learned about it.
Yeah.
Do you know how I learned about it?
I don't.
So
no.
It came at the most timely time of my life, man. I had just found out I was going to be a dad, which is the only thing that I ever knew that I wanted to be,
Yeah.
And but I had no idea how I was going to be a high level dad, or if it was possible to be a high level dad and a high level business owner. Like I didn't have time. Time was huge for me. I didn't have that. I wanted it. All of a sudden I find out I'm going to be a dad. I'm terrified. I'm just trying to do the best that I can to provide for my family.
Yeah.
And I remember I was on a business trip and Britt sent me an email that was, just this email of, hey, disappointment, you know? It was disappointment in the most loving way. I remember I got it right as I was taking off on my flight. And so I get this email and it blips on my phone, right? And I read it. I start crying like a freaking baby. On the guy next to me was probably like, what? It's early morning flight, dude. You know, it's like 6, 7, whatever. Yeah. And the guy's like, what happened to
poor
this
guy
dude last night? You know? But then that, you know, I can't remember if it was that same trip but very shortly after, dude, I run into Ryan Woolley. And I had known Ryan for a long time. I did some internet stuff. He did some internet stuff. I did some single family stuff. He did some single family stuff. And I see him in the airport and he was like, bro, I was like, what are you doing? Right? What have you been up to? He's like, man, I just learned how to buy apartment buildings. I was like, oh, sweet. Like duplex, triplex. He's like, no, like big ass apartment buildings, 100+ units. And I was like, what the apartment buildings? Like, how, what? Okay. And he's like, dude, I'm so pumped about it. Right? He had just learned about it. And so he starts telling me about it. And then I ended up, I went to the same class that he went to and learned about it. And dude, it opened my eyes. It was like the most, I don't know, pivotal moment for me. It couldn't have come at a better time. Because all of a sudden now I see this way to gain passive income, to acquire real estate that I never thought was possible, that would allow me. I just saw this as something that would allow me to accomplish the goals that I have, which I was pumped about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to talk about the difference between a syndication and a REIT.
Okay.
I think it's important to understand what a REIT is too. So if you could briefly explain what that is. Yeah. What are the biggest difference between a REIT and a syndication?
Okay, so you look at owning an apartment, right? The problem with owning an apartment, or the ability, is it's individual ability. That's the problem, right? So the solution comes down to real estate syndications, but that is different than a REIT. A REIT, a real estate investment trust, that's a privately or publicly traded company that owns and manages these real estate holdings. So it's like investing in stocks, but instead of investing in a stock, you're investing into a REIT, a real estate investment trust. So it's different because when you invest into a REIT, you're not investing into a specific investment. More, you're investing with a specific company.
Right.
And that's why I related to stocks. Syndication is different though. So syndication is, and it's different because like when you invest with a syndicator, you're investing and you own a percentage of a specific property itself. You have they call it fractional ownership into a property. And that's important because that allows us as investors, you with listening to this as an investor, to actually own and benefit from all that real estate has to offer. And I'll give you one example of this. One example that's small that has a huge impact though, and that is the tax benefits, the tax shelters. Like investing in a REIT, that doesn't provide you with the same tax shelters that come from owning a fractional percentage of the actual apartment building. So it's just different, similar but different.
I would say better.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
I think one of the biggest differences between a syndication and a REIT too is a lot of time with a syndication, you know what property your money's going to.
Yep.
And you become a limited partner or an owner, a very small percentage owner of that property.
Yeah.
In a REIT, that's not what's happening.
Different.
Right.
But listen, better is based on preference.
For sure. For sure.
There's pros and cons to both. It just depends on what people's investment needs are, what their goals are. But obviously, I think that it's better too. That's why I do it.
Yeah.
That's what I invest in.
Yeah, obviously. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning of the episode is oftentimes when we're talking to people, they don't know what syndication is. They don't know that they can own apartment buildings. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that like the majority of investors or people with high net worth, even people with high net worth, don't realize that they can invest into apartment buildings?
I think that it is getting better. I think that is. So first off, why I believe that our traditional education program and our traditional investment options are fed to us by a very controlled narrative. But God, dude, don't make me get down that pipeline. I mean, I'll ruffle some feathers, which I love to do, but people don't love their feathers ruffled.
Right,
okay?
Right.
But dude, it's, and I say it's getting better because I actually believe that more and more people are seeing that. They're seeing their 401k as an example. They're like, okay, this is not going to get me to where I want to. So they start looking and pursuing and searching for other alternative investments. And so it is getting better. From when I first started, I see people that know about it way more, right? But why don't so many people know that this is even a possibility? Why didn't I know it was a possibility? The more that I explore the investment world, Every day, I realize the more I just realize my own financial illiteracy. I mean, I'm always trying to learn, right?
Right.
But especially in the beginning. But the more I talk about apartment syndications, the more I realize I'm not alone in that financial illiteracy. Now, since I've understood that, I study religiously about that. Why? Because it's my job, my responsibility to be smart with how I invest and where I put my money and where I'm putting other people's money, man. Like, it's important. So I would guess that the majority of the population, they view their investment options. What do you think I'll ask you, dude. What do you think that the majority of people view their investment options as?
Growing up, the only things that I was ever taught about was your 401k and stocks.
Yep.
That's all that I ever even knew about. Those are really the only two options that I even knew were. Now I understand that there's other things too, like cryptocurrency, there's real estate, there's tons of different ways to invest. Now I understand that, but those were definitely the two that I knew about, were stocks and your 401k.
Dude, you even think of like owning your own personal residence, and as of late, over the last, not long ago, man, the last decade, flipping properties have become more and more popular, right? Why? Because there's a bunch of TV shows about flipping properties.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But I believe that most people view their options as this financial literacy. They view their options as, number one, what you mentioned, owning your own personal residence. That's most people's biggest investment they'll ever make, man. And that is not an investment. Listen, buying a house, shit, that's a major financial decision, and it can give you a lot of peace of mind and a wonderful place to live. That's great, but it's not an investment.
No, right.
It's a liability, not an asset. If you've never read Rich Dad Poor Dad, anybody out there, you got to go read it. That was a huge mindset shift for me. So owning your own personal residence, and then number two would be what you said too, which is just, well, the traditional American 401k, IRA, 403b, whatever, right? Why? So you look at, why is that important? You got an employer match, you get some tax breaks. That's not a bad deal until you're ready to retire. That's when your 401k or 403b all of a sudden suddenly becomes the worst possible retirement plan out there, and that's a fact. I told somebody the other day that if the American 401k, I don't know if this is, we might need to edit this part. I don't know what the rules are. No editing on here?
No editing.
Woo. Hey, Christine, if you're listening to this, maybe plug your ears for a second. Okay. Mom, you too. I told somebody the other day, I'm like, dude, the American 401k was an event in Dallas. I was like, bro, the American 401k, are you kidding me? That's like, if it were an ice cream flavor, it would be pralines and dick. Okay. Which is great. I don't care who you are. That's funny. I love it.
Great comparison.
There we go. And then stocks is the other one, right? Stocks, it's probably one of the most well-known investment types. And if you had but it's highly volatile. It's just stocks are volatile. Crypto is now popular as well. It's very new.
It's the wild, wild west in the cryptocurrency.
So just like any investment, dude, do your research, be comfortable with the risk-return ratio. And then the other one that I would say, if I would round them out, would be bonds. And people still invest in, how do I know that? Because I talk to investors all the time, and people still invest in low-yield bonds. Dude, it baffles me. Like, we've done an episode before on inflation.
Right.
Okay, so treasury yields on these bonds, they're below 1% in some cases. In some cases, even close to zero, which is evidence to me that some investors, they seek treasuries like this because they're more for the return of their money than, rather than the return on their money, which is also just evidence of how financially illiterate.
And that comes down to mindset too. Yeah. Abundant versus scarcity. Yeah. For sure.
And
for sure.
What was the Aloha principle we shared last time, which was striving for excellence, never being complacent. Dude, don't be complacent with just the return of your money. Jeez almighty, that's horrible. That's not even beating inflation, right? So in other words, I believe that the majority of people invest in garbage because they don't know any better, dude. And that's a travesty. That's why I love teaching people about it. I literally love it because I am grateful. I was so grateful. I'm still grateful. You know that?
Yeah.
I learned about it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, let's get back on track here. What are the different parties?
Off track?
Well, I mean, a little bit. We're talking about syndication.
I was talking about pralines and dick. Let's be honest. We got off track. Okay,
we got a little bit off track.
Reel me back in
with these other investment opportunities. Talking about syndication, what parties are involved or what team members are involved? Right? We talked about how syndication is a big team, like a big partnership. Who's involved in those? Okay,
so I'll give you a couple of key roles. Okay, you have what's considered the sponsor or the loan guarantor. Let me say this too. There's multiple ways to say the same thing. So people will call it the sponsor. They'll call it the general partner, the GP, the operator, the syndicator, right? Apartment syndication. I'm a real estate syndicator.
KPs.
There we go.
Yeah. And there's so many principles.
There's a number of ways. But that person, whatever you call them, that person's in charge of really putting the deal together. When I talk about active investments versus passive, my role as a passive investor, which will come in next, we call them a limited partner, is to put my money into a deal. But my role when I talk about active investing is all these things that we'll talk. So all those roles we just talked about there, the GP, the general partner, whatever, that's when I actively invest, that's what I do. So I'm finding the deal, I'm identifying the market, I'm sourcing the property, I'm securing the funding, I'm signing on the loan, I'm guaranteeing the loan, I'm developing and overseeing the business plan, we're managing the property management company, like raising the money, like that's what we do is the active side. So that first role, right, the sponsor, the general partner, whatever, it's their job to put everything together and oversee it.
Okay.
Second role would be the limited partner. And that's what I was talking about last trip was when I say passive investments, that means me coming in as a limited partner. They're also known as LPs, investors, accredited investors, right? That's our passive investing side. And once again, I just mentioned this, but they're responsible for investing money into the deal. They invest a portion of the money. That's another thing that I think is important is when I talk to somebody for the first time about apartment investing, somebody who's maybe interested in investing in apartments. Or, dude, when I tell people what I do for a living, people would call it an elevator pitch.
When you're talking to these limited partners.
Yes. Yep. Or a potential one. I never know if they are, but a potential one. I never use the word syndication. I never use the word like buy apartments with investors because most people don't know what a syndication is, and most people don't believe that they could ever own an apartment. So I talk about buying real estate with investors, and I have to clarify pretty much every time that you don't have to fund the entire amount of the money needed. We fund a portion of it on the active side, and then we have a bunch of other investors who fund a percentage of it as well. You know, our minimum investment's typically 50 to 100 grand to be able to come and invest in these deals. That is your passive investment side. And once again, you know, it can be a big property. It can be one company that comes in and brings that entire amount or one individual that comes in to bring that entire amount. But most of the time, it's just a number of private investors who are looking to benefit from real estate without the hassles or headache or liability of operating, you know, the property. So
those are the first two.
Then the third one, to just keep it very general, would be the property management team. Now, the property management team, they don't own the deal, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but they don't own the deal. They just oversee the day-to-day operations. Our job on the active side, the sponsor side, right, is to oversee the property management company, to manage them. But the property management company, they take care of the tenants, they market the property, they're overseeing any renovations. We just make sure on the sponsor general partner side that they're doing that properly, which is a full-time job. I'll tell you that right now.
Definitely.
Those are your three major roles in a real estate syndication.
That's awesome. So, and in each one of those things, there's a bunch of people.
Yep.
There's not necessarily one GP or one LP or one property manager.
Yeah, teams.
There's teams within those. So I guess my next question would be is how do you go about splitting up those profits within those people, right? A syndication coming together as a team to close on these deals. How does everybody make money?
There is a ton of different ways. And I know you already know this, but there's so many ways to split it up, right? Like literally we do a whole class, a full day of just different ways to structure your deals. But I'll tell you the most common way is what we call a straight split. And a straight split is a straight split of the profits, and it can be different percentages. The most common, I would say, is 70-30, where the LPs, if you remember the passive investors, they would own 70% of the deal, which means they would get 70% of the profits. And the general partners, the GPs, get 30% of the profits, or 60-40, or 50-50, or 75-25. Those are all very common.
Real quick,
Yep.
you mentioned the property managers too. How do they get paid?
Just a set fee. So it's usually depending on the size of the deal.
Yeah.
And I won't get into the details there, but the bigger the deal, the lower the percentage goes. But that they get paid a percentage, anywhere from 3 to 8%, typically on these apartments, of what's called the effective gross income, which is really the income that they collect on the property.
Right.
So
okay, cool. I just wanted to cover that.
Sweet.
Okay, sweet.
There's also the most common is a straight split. There's also what's called a waterfall structure, and a waterfall structure is picture a waterfall, right? Comes over and it say that there's different pools underneath this waterfall that it fills up before it drains over. So waterfall structure, it comes down, fills up one pool. Once that first tier, I guess, is full, then it falls down into the next tier, which is also this is very common though. So that would be considered a preferred return. So a lot of people will structure it where the investors get a preferred return. It just means they get paid first. They're first in the waterfall structure. 6 to 8% preferred return is pretty common. And then everything after that is split 70-30. Okay. Or it's a straight split as long as the investors get at least their preferred return. That's how we do most of our deals.
That's awesome.
So then that's the investor side. Then the sponsors, they get the majority of their money from a split of the profits, like we just mentioned, that 70-30, right? So the split of the profits that they split with limited partners. But sponsors, general partners, we also make money up front as well. Things like an acquisition fee up front for putting the deal together. That's typically 3 to 5% of the purchase price. An asset management fee throughout the deal as well. That's usually 1 to 2% of the effective gross income. That's for overseeing and managing the management company. And then there's some other fees on the back end. This is called the disposition fee that they can get paid as well. But the majority of their money comes from the split of the cash flow or equity from the deal. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
One more thing that I'll mention. Limited partners, okay? We talked that limited partners own the majority. They typically have the majority share of the deal. They're the majority shareholders of the deal, right? They own the biggest portion of the deal. And they receive the biggest majority of the profits, obviously, but they're also limited partners. So they don't have voting rights, which you don't want that either, because if you have voting rights, then you also have liability. So a passive investor is literally, they're passive. They're passive. They don't participate in the risk, the liability, anything. They're putting their money to work and making money on their money. So.
Awesome. So to wrap up, we went over a bunch of things today.
Yep.
Wrap up. Apartment syndication. The very first thing we talked about is what is apartment syndication? Essentially a team of people getting together. Team of people or companies or businesses getting together to buy these big apartment buildings. We talked about the difference between a REIT and syndication.
Yep.
Things are two very different things.
Yeah.
To understand the difference of those that led into financial illiteracy or literacy is understanding and really understanding the options that you do have available. Yeah. And then we kind of wrapped up there at the very end of how those profits are split up.
Yeah, different roles and what's there.
Anything you want to add before we kind of wrap up here? That's really what those are the things that I wanted to touch on. If
I were to summarize the most basic, what is apartment syndication? And apartment syndication is a way for you as an individual, me as an individuals to get access to these institutional grade investments and these are investments that used to only be available for the largest of institutional investors, which is probably why that's probably why we thought that the only people that had access were, wealthy families,
right.
old rich white dudes, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a way for the regular, normal, everyday people like you and I to own one of the best assets out there, which is apartment buildings.
That's awesome. As we always wrap up the Aloha Friday episodes with an Aloha value and a Hawaiian value, what is the one that we'll wrap up with today?
I was thinking about this as we were going through that, and I feel like this is perfect, which is Lau Lima. Okay, Lau Lima means many hands cooperating and working together. So Lau, that means much or very many. Lima means, I think, hand. Yeah, Lima means hand. and it's one of Hawaii's core values. So Laulima, it encourages us to. So you think of the principle, right?
Yeah.
Syndication. So Laulima encourages us to work together for a greater cause. That's what syndication is, dude.
Yeah.
And I believe to my core, man. I believe you've heard me say this. I know you've heard me say this. I just believe that every person has a contribution to make. And Laulima reminds us of that, right? So every person has something to offer. Our differences can complement one another and make us all stronger. And we have different strengths, weaknesses that we can bring together to be very powerful. And I'll give you an example of this, okay? Ancient Hawaii, people lived in these little communities. And those communities survived and thrived off of the contribution of every member of that community. You had people who were fishers, people who were tapa makers, people who were weavers, all those kind of things. But these big tasks, there were certain big tasks that required the help of every single person. And one example of that's called the hukilau. Do you know what the hukilau is?
I don't know. I've heard the word.
First off, it's a bitchin' word.
It is.
Hukilau.
Yeah.
It is. It's where members of the community would cast this giant net out into the sea and to catch fish. And it required everyone to pull it back in. So it'd be like 1, 2, huki, right? So like when they just pull this net in. And when the net was finally dragged ashore, the leaders of the community would then divide the fish amongst all the families. So this brought this sense of community, but it also reminded us that we're all in this together. And I'll wrap it up with this. When I think about ancient Hawaiian communities, it makes me remember and realize how much I love, the freaking multifamily community. Because, we're all in this together, and there's definitely enough fish for everyone. And that's what I've learned from apartment syndications, and that's what you just learned today. God, you're welcome, dude. Jeez, we just waxed on you poetic right in your eardrum. You're welcome on this Aloha Friday drip. Anything else you want to add?
No, don't forget to share the episode. There's a bunch of really good free content that Tyler takes a lot of time to prepare and get out to everybody for free. So the only thing that we ask you to do...
We're in charge of this shit?
No, we're not, dude. Can you believe that?
God,
Can you believe that? I know.
No, bro.
I know. The only payment that we ask is that you share, so that we can get this out to as many people. The more people that understand apartment syndication, the better it is for the business as well.
Bro, I'm a capitalist. We got to start putting a price tag on this thing, dude.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning in today. Tyler, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, dude.
Tune in daily to the daily drips. As Tyler kind of mentioned at the beginning, we have our daily drips Monday through Thursday with Dallas dropping mindset principles that are so beneficial. So please tune in, listen to those.
And then also
like, review, share.
Well, yeah, but also tune in on Saturdays. I didn't mention
I was getting there. And then Friday, we have our Aloha Friday episodes you guys just listened to. And then Saturday, we'll have a guest on where I interview a guest, whether that's about entrepreneurship, a mindset principle, what they're working on those Saturday episodes that are also very beneficial.
So
get a bunch of different perspectives. So it's awesome. Again, thank you for tuning in. Have a great,
you do it.
No, you do your send off. You do your send off.
I'm getting the last word down.
Yes, go.
Live always with aloha. Peace.